All right, it's a board meeting. We are rocking and rolling, and we had a late scratch. So please hold all tickets. A late scratch. You will be refunded your money if you bet on House Majority Leader John Deal. He had a phone call that he had to handle, so we certainly understand. So we apologize. And we did not have enough time to get his understudy in, so... Tony Messenger, editorial page editor at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, will have to play both the John Deal role and the Tony Messenger role. Good morning, Tony Messenger.
Freedom! Liberty! Sorry.
Right.
Oh, sorry. I was being John Deal there for a moment.
Job creators.
And that dulcet tone is former Chief of Staff of Governor Holden, Jane Dueker. Jane, good morning. Your microphone's on. Please act accordingly.
Thank you, McGraw. Happy to be here.
We don't want you to embarrass your mom.
Nice.
What's your shirt today?
My shirt today is George Orwell's 1984.
In honor of Edward Snowden.
Well, just in honor of all government spying.
Okay,
Big
good.
Brother is watching.
Say hello to President Obama.
Everybody.
Right now, because you know he's listening in.
They're all listening.
They're all listening
Everybody's
in.
All
and
right.
there's a lot of government contractors who have access as well, which is always comforting.
You are professionally involved in the Ellisville case.
Absolutely.
A lot of that happened last night. I want to get to that a little bit later on in the show, but we're going to start the board meeting today off with the Defense of Marriage Act. Tony Messenger, what are your thoughts as you sit and watch the Supreme Court strike down a federal law passed by 85 senators and signed by President Clinton?
Well, I mean, it's a historic day, and it's a day that 20 years from now we'll look back and say what took so long. We actually went through this period in which this country opposed gay marriage and thought that it was a problem. But one of the things that the court did so well, I had read a piece a couple of months ago comparing the court's challenge with Roe v. Wade. Mm-hmm. And what some gay rights activists wanted, and I'm in favor of gay marriage and gay rights, but I'm glad the court didn't go all the way like they did in Roe v. Wade and basically take it away from the states and say gay marriage is legal, all of these other state laws are outlawed. Because what's going to happen now
multiple sclerosis falls under an autoimmune disease, correct?
The country continues to go state by state towards allowing this freedom, this absolute equality, by having joining the 13 states that now have gay marriage as legal. It's going to become in another 5 or 10 years just so automatic that the nation will be all the way there by the time the court gets the next case, say invalidating the Missouri law or constitutional amendment opposing gay marriage. Once that happens, we may end up with a unanimous court decision in 5-10 years.
It's interesting because they didn't, Jane Dueker, the lawyer on the panel here, they didn't, you can make an argument that states' rights won out yesterday and that Scalia voted against states' rights in that the state of Iowa has a right to allow homosexuals and lesbians to marry. That's their choice.
Correct.
And if they decide, who's the federal government to say they can't, so therefore they get the right to marry because it's a state's choice.
Yeah, that is the funny, inconsistent part of this, because if you look at his sort of jurisprudence as a Supreme Court justice, he has always been very states' rights. And this was a political reach. I mean, and it's not the first time. I mean, when you look at it from a legal standpoint, not necessarily from a political or even a it's very similar to Bush v. Gore. I mean, that wasn't very states' rights. States' rights is the states decide how they count their votes. The federals don't get involved. I mean, and so it seems when it's really politically convenient, he forgets about states' rights. That's interesting.
What happens now when a couple is legally married in Iowa? Lesbians are married in Iowa. Mm-hmm. And they get their Social Security benefits now from the federal government.
Correct.
But then they choose to move to Missouri.
Correct. That doesn't necessarily.
That doesn't allow or recognize it. Mm-hmm. So are they married in Missouri, but are they still recognized by the feds? There's a lot of legal limbo here.
Oh, clearly. And I think the feds have intimated, and a lot of people have said it, but it's not like it's in writing somewhere that we're going to recognize it, that you sort of have a a comedy, and you have even though we don't recognize it, we have to give reciprocity. But that's not a settled issue. And what this does now is it raises the issue of like an interstate commerce kind of argument that you can't stop these of things at the border. I mean, it does give some legal arguments to people to say, look, when you're talking about federal benefits, they cross state lines. You can't have states, determining federal law, nullification, that kind of stuff. So, yeah, it does. It gives a lot of limbo, which means this battle's not over, which means this incremental move. I actually agree with you that politically it's shoving a flea down an elephant down a flea's throat a lot slower.
Well, here's what's going to happen next. That Iowa couple or that Missouri couple that goes to Iowa to get married
and then comes back
and is recognized by the federal government and is recognized by Iowa. Here's the great thing about that couple. Here's the contradiction in Missouri law. If that couple is a concealed gun carrying couple of lesbians with concealed carry weapons that they got in Iowa, Missouri law says that the state law in Missouri has no border and will recognize their concealed carry permit in Iowa, but not their marriage. And so
it's so true. I mean,
it's what's going to happen. Freedom. What's going to happen? That was John Deere. Freedom. What's going to happen is this. All across the nation, state by state, city by city, in states like Missouri that have backwards, discriminatory, anti-freedom laws that don't let people choose their spouses, the gay rights movement is going to look for that perfect set of legal circumstances.
The absurdity of it all.
And that's what's going to happen. You're going to have that Iowa couple that moves to St. Louis, that has their business. This is the great thing. The businesses are already so far ahead of the legislatures. The businesses are going to recognize that marriage.
Absolutely.
The federal government is going to recognize that marriage. All the federal benefits are going to flow, but they're going to do something. They're going to try to get married in the city of St. Louis, or they're going to try to go somewhere and get benefits recognized in Missouri that would be recognized for me and my wife, for Jane and her husband, and they're going to be denied, and then they're going to file a lawsuit. And that case, whether it's in Missouri or Illinois or any of the other states that don't recognize the freedoms, will now go ultimately to the Supreme Court, and based on the DOMA decision, will ultimately overturn all of these states' prohibitions against gay marriage. I don't know when it'll happen, but it's going to happen within the next decade or so.
All right, back up a second. You're telling me that if I live in Iowa and I go and get a concealed carry permit in Iowa,
yes,
and I then travel to Missouri to go hunting, and I have my concealed carry on me, and they say you're not registered in Missouri, but I am in Iowa.
Right.
I'm good.
The Missouri law specifically
reciprocity.
Specifically says that if you get a concealed gun permit somewhere else, well, of course we're going to recognize you in Missouri. It's a gun.
Freedom. So, I mean, it is the absurdity of this is going to reveal itself.
Here's the absurdity that I see with you liberals over there.
Right.
And that is this.
Independent. Nice try, though.
You're all wet. Everybody, Thomas, Scalia. They throw out the voting rights bill because even though it's passed by the legislature and signed by the president, the conservative wing throws it out because it's not needed anymore. Well, who is that? The Supreme Court's decision to make?
Well, I mean,
to overturn that, but the conservatives are okay with that. Then the next day, DOMA comes out and passed by the whole deal, right? All of a sudden, the liberals are like, yeah, absolutely, throw that out. But wait a minute, the Voting Rights Act, that should stick around. It's everybody's dirty when you look at this truly objectively.
Oh, no, it's only judicial activism if you lose.
Right.
Okay, right. So, I mean, it's kind of fun. You're right. I mean, and that's why I talk about, when you say these people, the justices have sort of this doctrinal, consistency. They don't.
Right.
I mean, they're human and they're lifetime appointees. So good luck with that.
Well, and if you ask Scalia during the whichever debate it was, I think it might have been the whenever he asked the question, when did it become illegal? Right? Remember that question when he kept asking, when did it become illegal to, right? And the guy, I think it was the healthcare debate or and the argument is, when did it become illegal to marry a gay person? Well, it always should have been legal, right? It was just denied for no other reason than somebody's prejudice, right?
Well, it was never really necessarily illegal until somebody determined it was sort of a great political issue, and then it ended up on, it was like an ALEC thing where all these people get together and say, ooh, this is a way to get out the vote. I mean, I was in the governor's office when it happened in Missouri, and we were the ones that had to decide when the gay marriage was going to go on the ballot, whether it was in Holden's primary.
Well, because that was because it was going to bring people out to the polls.
And it did, and it brought out all the conservatives into our primary, and which was a sort of an interesting dynamic. So, no, it was clearly a get out the vote thing. It was a political thing that sort of went crazy.
Right.
And so, I mean, it's sort of nonsense.
It's interesting.
It is, and I think that people, you want to have an illusion that the Supreme Court is sort of beyond those kind of influences, but I think we need to be realistic. Good things have happened because you have people who can never be thrown out deciding things, and bad things happen because people who cannot be thrown out are deciding things. I do
ask this question: why does it, if someone's against gay marriage, how does it affect them? Right?
Well, that question's never been answered.
Right.
Are you so afraid of your own marriage that you're worried that other people are going to somehow
banning
ruin your marriage?
Banning smoking in a bar affects an individual more than allowing two gays to get married.
I agree. And in fact, from sort of a practical standpoint, when you talk about division of property and you talk about succession of property, which was always the reason to have marriage, so that you have settling of property and affairs, it's actually more practical because you have these people living together, and you can't have certainty among, when somebody can visit someone in the hospital, adoption of children, property, rights.
Well, this has got to be one of the largest tax cuts ever, because all these gay married couples now get a huge tax cut.
It is. It's a tax cut. It's actually going to help. It's going to help the revenue for this country because of the marriage tax penalty. It's going to change ethics reporting laws in Congress because gay members of Congress, their spouses are now under laws that they weren't previously
Personal
under
financial
in terms of gifts and that sort of thing. It's already changed the immigration debate because the Leahy amendment that would have applied to gay couples who are trying to sponsor their spouses from another country is no longer necessary because now the federal law can't discriminate against those couples. And so it's an amazing decision. I want to, if we have time, McGraw, I want to get back real quick to the voting rights thing. I disagree with you. There is actually a consistency between the two decisions.
I wanted to talk about that
and well, actually, you know what? Hold that thought.
Okay. Yeah, because
we'll come back.
We'll
come back. This is worth two segments. That's Tony Messenger, St. Louis Post-Dispatch editorial page editor, who's playing both the John Deal role. He's doing that when he yells freedom.
Freedom.
Jane Dueker.
Job creators.
Second. Right. Jane Dueker. It was former chief of staff of Governor Holden. It's the board meeting minus John Deal. Last minute scratch. 9:22 on the Big 550 KTRS and STLtoday.com. It's the board meeting on KTRS and STLtoday.com. Your point between the Voting Rights Act and the DOMA case.
Yeah, because you brought up the inconsistency, and there is some inconsistency in terms of the critics calling judicial activism. The point Jane made is correct. But there's actually some consistency between the very bad voting rights decision because of practically what it's going to do to this nation and the very good DOMA decision. And the consistency is this. The states' rights issue is relatively similar in both of them. What the court said in the Voting Rights Act is that the formula that Congress uses to determine whether a state needs preclearance from the Justice Department to make sure that it isn't discriminating against minorities in terms of its voting laws is outdated. And it directed Congress to go fix it. That's a sort of pro-states' rights thing. And if Congress had the ability to even pass a resolution to ask itself whether it could go to the bathroom, then Congress would come in and fix this. But Congress is inept right now, and so they won't. And that's why that decision is so bad, because its practical effect is Texas and South Carolina and all of these states that have tried to pass horribly racist voter ID laws that are basically poll taxes are now going to pass them, and it's going to be much harder for the federal government to stop that.
But is it the Supreme
because Congress
Court's
won't step in?
Is it the Supreme Court's job to say something is outdated?
Well, yes. In some ways it is. And let me just tell you why. Because I think, and it's no different than like if you want to put it in a Missouri context when the Supreme Court said, by the way, the foundation formula is broken. Okay? So I think how they
the school funding foundation.
The school funding foundation formula. And but the courts are not, if they stay consistent with separation of powers, they're not gonna put together the new formula. That's not their job. And so I think this is not dissimilar saying, look, guys, this formula is, I don't know how many
because it's
years
outdated,
old.
it creates discrimination within the states and affects the states' rights. That's their argument, and so it's tied to a constitutional.
It is, and it's not uncommon for the courts to say this is broken. Now it's our job to put it back into the political arena, and the political and the legislative and the policy needs to be made by Congress. The problem is Congress is broken, and so I hate the practical effect of this decision. And the bigger problem is Congress won't step up. And it's going to be ugly, and things are going to get bad, and you're going to have more lawsuits because people know that some of this stuff they're going to pass is patently racist, and so you're going to have lawsuits that way. But usually it works because the legislative branch steps up. But we're going to have a problem here.
Before we move on, there's a case working its way through the Missouri court system, and that is a gay trooper was killed in the line of duty on Christmas Eve a few years ago. His gay lover wants the benefits.
The death benefits.
And deserves them.
Has been denied because their marriage is not recognized, and it's working its way. I think it's sitting in the Supreme Court now. Does this case yesterday affect that Missouri case at all?
It depends on whether the benefits are federal or state, and I haven't looked at it closely. If it's state benefits, it's going to be...
It's state benefits.
Then I think it's going to be challenging because I think DOMA gave us federal benefits but did not go as far as to say the states can enforce bans on gay marriage within their own borders, with their own.
It could do is you could have a Missouri Supreme Court, if a Missouri Supreme Court wants to apply that federal decision in terms of the constitutional argument in this case, I could see at least a couple of the Supreme Court justices in Missouri saying, wait a minute, that decision changes how we apply because the argument's the same whether it's federal or state. We can't discriminate in this case, and we're going to apply. I'm not sure if they'll be able to do that because the trooper and his partner weren't married. And so the set of facts aren't quite the same.
Exactly.
And that's why what's going to be interesting over the next few years is you're going to have lots of cases like this in which the people like Jane, the lawyers in the world, will be looking through all the sets of facts and say, no, that's not the one we want to go to the Supreme Court. No, that's not the one we want to go to the Supreme Court. Ding, 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 this one's perfect, and that one's going to overturn all these state laws.
Could this one be perfect, or this one's not perfect because they won't, quote unquote, weren't married legally?
Right, because it doesn't put the issue of the legality or the properness of gay marriage because they didn't even try to get married.
Right.
I mean, so I think
as far as we know, I don't know all the details.
That's exactly right. But I mean, because it is true that Missouri law on the Constitution is very similar to the federal law. Okay, but the issue has to be: is there a reasonable basis to deny gay people the right to get married? This isn't that exact case.
Right. But they weren't married because they weren't allowed to be married.
Correct. But they didn't go to Iowa and try, or they didn't try, or
right.
But
it's
coming.
So when the next similar case of a gay state trooper or a gay firefighter or cop or somebody who's denied those sorts of benefits, which it was a death benefit,
visiting in the hospital.
When that one comes up, and it's a couple that's living in Missouri that had to go to Iowa to get married, but then the hospital or the state or whatever says we don't recognize your benefits. Then here's what I'd like to see happen, and this is turning it on its head. I'd like to see some brave public officials actually say, you know what? We read the DOMA case. We think Missouri's law is unconstitutional. We're giving you those benefits. We're going to recognize the freedom. We're going to ignore the Missouri law and give you those benefits. And then let
the opposers sue.
John Deal, or the House of Representatives say, "Oh, wait a minute, no, that's not right," and let them challenge it. That's what I'd love to see happen.
There's a kink in the oxygen cord going up to Tony Messenger's nose, because that's you're not getting oxygen all the way to your brain.
But no, it's not going to happen.
I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. Let us. We're going to move on. Immigration. Roy Blunt said some interesting things about all of that. How does that affect this? All that coming up in a moment. The board meeting continues with Tony Messenger, Jane Deal, Jane Dueker, Tony Messenger, sans John Deal, who's out on assignment. 9:33 KTRS. 9:40 on the Big 550 KTRS. John Deal out, Tony Messenger, editorial page editor
Job creator.
Jane Dueker, former Chief of Staff of Governor Holden, here in for the board meeting. Let's talk about immigration. Roy Blunt, Senator Blunt, in that chair, Tony Messenger said he was voting no. He also said that there was no chance of this bill passing the House of Representatives. The Senate might get 70-plus votes on this. What are your thoughts?
I wish Senator Blunt would vote as smart as I think he actually is. Our border security has gotten so much better over the last decade or so, and the one sad thing about this immigration bill, which will pass, and I disagree with him. I think Speaker Boehner will call it up and pass it with Democrat votes.
You do?
I do. But the new amendment throws 20,000 more people on a border that we're already doing a pretty good job of protecting. That's just silly politics. That's Senator Blunt being worried about a primary in 2016 because Missouri in so many areas has gone off the rails politically. The fact is, this bill is wanted by the business community. It's wanted by the farming community that supported Senator Blunt. It's wanted by a vast majority of America who understands that, much like Ronald Reagan did, the Republican that members of Mr. Blunt's party love to talk about, recognized that this country was built on immigration.
Right.
And that this hatred and vitriol with which some members of the right have spewed against Hispanics and people from Mexico and Guatemala and wherever else immigrants
Canadians
are coming to this country is bad business, and it's wrong, and it goes against what this country stands for. And yes, some people have come into this country illegally, but they violated a civil law just like you and I'm assuming, have violated civil laws occasionally as it relates to our driving habits. And the penalty isn't deportation. The penalty is you pay a fine, you have some sort of recompense, and then you go ahead and become the citizen that you want to become to help contribute to this country and pay taxes and improve our economy and everything else. The bill will pass the Senate. It will pass the House. It will become law, because if it doesn't, I'll be incredibly disappointed.
Well, hold on a second. Why do you think Boehner is going to break his own Hastert rule? Or why do you think he's going to...
Boehner's going to do it because he already has twice. Because Boehner's traditional support is from the business community, not from the Tea Party. Because Boehner cares about his legacy.
And he better be effective soon.
Because once it passes the Senate, the pressure on Boehner is going to be significant. Because he has absolutely no leverage. And because the most serious Republican presidential candidate, Marco Rubio, is going to vote for the bill and push for the bill and lobby for the bill on Fox News. And the pressure on Boehner, who's already broken the Hastert rule twice when he had no leverage whatsoever. He's going to fold. He's going to do it. He has no choice.
Does he lose his speakership over this?
Who cares?
No. I don't think he does. But I think he better come up with a victory soon, because he's looking horrible. The farm bill debacle, I mean, that was just that. He should be embarrassed. And so I think that Senator Blunt feels pretty safe voting no, because I think he knows it's going to pass, and it's going to be no harm, no foul. So he gets the benefit of, catering to the Tea Party kooks, but also no real harm happens. So I think maybe he's probably being smart politics, but not being smart policy. And of course, I'd like to see some of our Republican leaders, the good ones, the smart ones, standing up and telling the fringe, we are not going to cater to the fringe anymore, and we're going to exercise some leadership.
Jane Dueker, if you could speak into the microphone.
Oh, sorry.
That would make people can really disagree with you then.
Exactly.
If they hear exactly what it is you're saying.
I think I agree. I think it's going to pass. I think And if it doesn't, Congress is so beyond broken. It would be demoralizing if they can't get this done.
Should there be a amendment to this bill forcing these illegals who are going to spend 13 years now trying to become American citizens, should they be forced, Tony Messenger, to buy health insurance before they become an American?
No.
Okay.
I mean,
That's
all
just
of
a
this,
game.
That's one of the amendments.
I know. It's nonsense.
This is the nonsense that the Republican Party has become. They can't do. Oh wait, let me be John Deal for a moment. Freedom.
Job creator.
They can't do anything without going back to Obamacare because
it's all they know.
It's like squirrel, Obamacare. It's like, come on. The immigration, this is just silly. Obamacare is based on primarily Republican principles. The immigration law is based on primarily Republican principles. We are spending a huge amount of money already and in this bill to put more border security on the border, and we still have Republicans trying to say, oh, we haven't secured the border, yet all of the, remember states' rights, all of the governors along the border, they want this bill.
Right. They know the reality. I have to love Ann Coulter on this, where her theory is, oh, yeah, this is going to be devastating to the GOP because if we actually, naturalize these people, they're going to be Democrats and we're going to lose races. And it's just unbelievable.
No, then we just don't make them vote.
Well, that's right. She doesn't want them to vote.
Laws so they can't vote.
Well, exactly. But I mean, I just laugh. I said, Ann and your cohorts, why don't you just convince people that your message is worth following? Why don't you try that instead of discriminating? Why don't we stop discriminating, and why don't you convince people that your policies are worth following? Why don't we go with that? And this is just a game.
Now you're talking crazy, Jane Dueker.
I know.
That's Jane Dueker, who clearly the oxygen hasn't gone to her brain in years.
Exactly.
Tony Messenger is here. We'll come back. We'll look at the latest on this Ellisville. Jane Dueker is professionally involved with that, plus the parting shot from the board meeting on the Big 550 KTRS, and you can watch it live at stltoday.com. All right, Tony Messenger is with us, editorial page editor at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Jane Dueker, former chief of staff of Governor Holden. John Deal, not here. There is a hole in our heart today because he is not here. Jane Dueker, Ellisville last night. Tell us what happened from your point of view.
Well, I mean, the first, thing was the breaking news that Paul Martin was fired.
Right.
So I think he indicated to reporters last night that he was asked to resign and he refused. So they relieved him of his
That's
duties.
The lawyer.
The lawyer, the city attorney.
So they asked him to quit. They asked him to resign. He said, I'm not doing it, and he quit.
No, and they
fired him.
They relieved him of his duties,
okay.
Correct.
As immediately.
Okay. Which they are empowered to do.
All
so
right.
I think now also last night, the ordinance authorizing the issuance of the TIF notes should certain conditions be met by Sansone and Walmart, that the notes could issue, but it didn't issue the TIF notes last night. It was merely an ordinance that authorized them to be issued once the conditions were met. So there was a lot of dispute over why did this have to be done now. There was nothing in the redevelopment agreement that required it at that time, and so why the big push? And the interesting was the threats. I mean,
well, now there's a councilwoman who's quoted as saying that the reason she voted in favor of this was that she was afraid to be sued, and the quote says, I can't be sued, my husband's retired.
Correct, and it was personal lawsuits. Now, there's a provision specifically in the redevelopment agreement that says that no city elected official or staff or anyone could ever be held liable personally for anything under the redevelopment agreement. But unfortunately, some council members didn't feel like they were getting good legal advice, and so they were scared. And this one, Councilman Reel, I mean, I feel bad for her. They did an orchestrated campaign on her. They didn't lob calls into the other council members. They targeted her.
Who's they?
Well, Sansone actually had people whose property is supposed to be bought within the redevelopment area, had them calling her saying, Sansone's going to sue you, Sansone's going to sue you. I mean, she got, 35 phone calls within the last 2 days saying, you have to call this special meeting, you have to vote yes, or you will be sued personally. And, I mean, it was orchestrated against her.
I've never heard a public official say, I'm going to vote a certain way because I'm afraid I'm going to get sued.
Exactly. And what was really ironic, which I appreciated Mayor Paul pointing out, was that right now, Mayor Paul has sued Councilman Perillo and former city attorney Paul Martin personally over the impeachment and some of the sort of the conduct that they engaged in to get that done. And, they're being covered by insurance and being covered by the city. So at the same time, they're being covered for their attorney's fees because of a lawsuit in their personal capacity. They're telling Councilwoman Reel, oh, the city's going to abandon you. And if you change your mind on anything on this project, then you're going to be sued personally.
We should say that you are the attorney for who?
The citizens. Tom DeBold is the citizen who is challenging the conditional use permit and has intervened in the impeachment case.
Has Sansone met all of the requirements yet?
No. And again, that was made clear last night. In order for the TIF notes to issue, they would have to show that all the property has been acquired, which has not, and that's undisputed. And they have to have a lease with Walmart that obligates Walmart to open the store, stock the store, and open it for at least one day. And none of that has been done. And I think as they were threatening the council members at the last meeting and even at this meeting, they basically said, until we figure out whether our conditional use permit is going to be upheld, we're not going to acquire this property. So these owners are in limbo, and especially the apartment complex, because they're losing tenants, because who's going to move into an apartment building that could be, sold and demolished at any time. So they can't keep up, the payments on their building and whatnot. And, Sansone is stalling, buying this property. I mean, this is the problem. This is what Sunset Hills did. When you push people and you ruin their property values, you better come through. And so I think, Sansone is effectively using that fear to put calls in to Councilman Reel. So, I mean, it was amazing to me. She was really torn, and I felt bad for her.
I've never heard anybody say, I'm going to vote one way because I'm afraid I'm going to get sued if I vote the other way. I've never heard that anywhere.
Well, and she's been clear because she does not want to deny her residents. Her residents don't want this. The citizens have been very clear. They don't want this. And she doesn't want to, violate what the will of her citizens, but she's afraid that they're going to take her house. I mean, it's really amazing to me that sort of intimidation. I wonder if Walmart appreciates that sort of intimidation by their developer.
That's Jane Dueker. The final word, Tony Messenger, last word goes to you. You have 1 minute.
I want to talk briefly about a travesty that's going on in Jefferson City today. Under the leadership of Speaker of the House Tim Jones, an interim committee that he set up is trying to go over the well-plowed ground of this alleged conspiracy in the Department of Revenue to share information about concealed gun carry holders in Missouri. The Senate already had a hearing. The Senate already subpoenaed records. Everybody from the governor's office and Department of Revenue that matters has already testified. Somebody from the Department of Revenue testified yesterday. This is a complete political sham, and what the speaker is saying he's going to do now is subpoena the governor's office while the governor's office is trying to figure out what to do about legislation. I hope the governor's office fights back. It's just a joke.
Tony Messenger, Jane Dueker. You can watch it all at stltoday.com/McGraw. We'll do it 2 weeks. So tutto